You've been told overthinking is a habit, something you can interrupt, redirect, or breathe through. It isn't a habit, it's a surveillance system, and it's running exactly the way it was built to run. The part nobody addresses is where it was built. Not in this relationship. Not from this person. The architecture was already in place before you ever sent a first message, before you knew what their silence felt like, before you had any reason to check their profile at midnight. You walked into this relationship with a nervous system that had already decided what emotional distance means and what it requires of you when it shows up. Attachment theory, developed by psychiatrist John Bowlby in the 1950s and expanded by researcher Mary Ainsworth, explains how early caregiving shapes the emotional architecture of every adult relationship. When a caregiver was inconsistent, present sometimes, withdrawn other times, your nervous system built a predictive model. Emotional closeness is unpredictable, and unpredictability requires vigilance. That wiring did not expire when you grew up. Anxious attachment produces a specific set of behaviors: hypervigilance to emotional distance, compulsive reassurance seeking, intense sensitivity to ambiguity. They take 4 hours to reply. Your body reacts before your mind does. You check the conversation again. Nothing changed, except your cortisol did. You think you're reacting to their silence. You're reacting to what silence meant in an emotional history that has nothing to do with them. In 2003, researchers Naomi Eisenberger and Matthew Lieberman at UCLA published findings in Science showing that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, not metaphorically. Neurologically, the same circuitry. A delayed text, interpreted as emotional distance, does not land in the part of your brain that processes logic. It lands in the part that processes being hurt. So when you tell yourself to just stop overthinking, you are asking rational thought to override a physical threat response. That is not a mindset problem. That is a biology problem. Now add the modern layer. WhatsApp introduced read receipts in 2014. Instagram introduced activity status shortly after. Every one of those features converted emotional uncertainty into a visible, trackable data point. A 2014 study published in Cyberpsychology, Behavior, and Social Networking found that increased surveillance behavior on social media was directly associated with higher jealousy and relationship dissatisfaction. You are not checking their profile because you're irrational. You're running a threat detection loop on a platform designed to keep you running it. Researcher Susan Nolan-Hoeksema, whose work shaped the clinical understanding of rumination, found that repetitive focus on emotional distress without resolution predicts anxiety and depression, not just discomfort. Overthinking one text becomes the emotional baseline of the entire relationship. Every reply that lands slightly flat, every moment of distance, gets processed through the same threat filter. Over time, the filter stops responding to individual moments. It runs continuously. That is where most people try to intervene. They find the pattern, name it, trace it back to a parent or an early wound. They learn the vocabulary: anxious attachment, hypervigilance, nervous system dysregulation. And something shifts, not in the behavior, but in how the behavior feels. Explained is not interrupted. The ACE studies, conducted by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente between 1995 and 1997, found that approximately 61% of adults reported at least one significant adverse childhood experience. Nearly 1 in 6 reported 4 or more. These were not people who lacked self-awareness. These were people who developed survival responses so efficient that they kept running long after the original environment was gone. The overthinking, the hypervigilance, the inability to sit with a silence that means nothing, these were accurate responses to earlier conditions. The conditions changed. The responses didn't. Anxious attachment is not a fixed trait. Research describes it as a pattern that developed under specific conditions and can shift with new relational experience. But that shift requires repetition in real conditions, not comprehension in safe ones. Tolerating a delayed reply without checking. Sitting with ambiguity without building a narrative around it, not once. Repeatedly, until the nervous system accumulates enough evidence that uncertainty does not end in abandonment. That evidence cannot come from understanding the pattern more precisely. It can only come from surviving uncertainty differently than you have before. Most overthinking loops close when they find certainty. The ones that don't, the ones that spiral after reassurance, that find a new angle to worry from even after confirmation, those aren't looking for information. They're practicing vigilance. And vigilance practiced long enough stops being a response to a relationship. It becomes the identity you carry into every one that follows.